Come on back. The role of a pastor at public events like this, the primary role is to tell you where the bathrooms are. And the bathrooms are straight across the hall, what we call the narthex, to your left. I also have been given a few announcements by the organizers and inspiration for tonight. Liz Kampke, who's at the rear of the chapel, and Christina Banis, who's also here on this side. That is well-deserved applause, as you can imagine what it takes to put together something like this. Anyway, this is what they asked me to ensure that I announced. First of all, make sure that everyone has a ticket. And if you didn't get a ticket when you came in, raise your hand and Christina will make sure that you get one. This is all important because it connects to the door prize drawing that will take place after Brian Hayden's presentation. And you probably saw there are quite nice gifts available. Also, Brian told me to convey to you that feel free to move around during his presentation. If you feel the need to go up and get a glass of wine or a beer or grab something from the food table, it won't disturb him at all, so please feel free to do that. Brian does ask that you would hold your questions until the end of his presentation. But he invites all questions and comments that you might have about what he has to say. And then finally, the drawing for the door prizes will take immediately after the Q&A session at the end of the event. Has that raised any questions? Christina, Liz, anything else to be announced? With that, I am going to turn this over to Brian Hayden, who is going to sort of weave into his presentation background on himself. Brian, it's all yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me here tonight. Can everybody hear me okay? All right. I am Brian Hayden. I'm the communications manager at Visit Buffalo Niagara, which is Erie County's tourism promotion agency. And I have the fun job of getting to promote Buffalo basically every day. And it's been an exciting 5-year journey at VBN since I had the chance to move back home in 2014 to take this job. Before that, I was a newspaper reporter in northern New York and worked at Clarkson University as well, and got my undergraduate degree in journalism at Syracuse University. So it's been kind of an adventure this last decade of moving home and then coming back, and not only getting to be a part of this renaissance, but promoting it for a living, basically. And I'm just so thrilled to see such a great turnout tonight. Really appreciate you coming out to hear about our efforts to promote Buffalo. And I think it speaks to the fact that everybody who's in Buffalo, who sees what's happening here, loves talking about Buffalo. I often feel that I'm never actually off from my job, because even when I'm having a beer with friends at a bar or something like that, people love talking about Buffalo, and I think that's why we're all here tonight, too. We love the city, and we love what's happened to it in the last several years. So just a few examples, I think. What my job is all about is telling great stories about our city that resonate with national and international media. And, as you can see up there, we have this abundance of great stories to tell. There are things now happening in our city that were beyond our collective wildest dreams even a decade ago. So you see on the left there's Buffalo River Works, where the GLF grain silos have been repurposed into a zip line and a rock climbing wall and a brewery and beer garden. We have the Richardson Olmsted campus, a National Historic Landmark that was formerly the Buffalo State Asylum for the Insane, turned into an 88-room hotel in 2017. That's the Martin House complex there, something that Frank Lloyd Wright called a well-nigh perfect composition when he designed it. Fell on hard times. Come this summer, will wrap up its 25-year, $50 million restoration. And on the right there, that's Larkin Square and Food Truck Tuesday, one of the largest food truck gatherings on a weekly basis in the eastern United States, in a whole area of the former Larkin Soap Company that was desolate all of a decade ago. thanks to the visionary work of the Zemsky family, that whole neighborhood has now been activated. So all of this has been happening just in the last several years. And then we at Visit Buffalo Niagara have the role of basically connecting the dots. What can we do with all these developments? What do they have in common? What kind of story can we weave together that's going to appeal to national and international media? So just in 2018, I mean, we hit sort of a high watermark of the buzz has been spreading thanks to some of the work we've been doing. I mean, we had a record amount of media coverage in 2018. Visit Buffalo Niagara helped place more than 200 stories around the country and even overseas too. We were involved in the Sunday Times of London piece that called Buffalo America's coolest summer city. The New York Times named Buffalo one of 52 places around the whole world to go in 2018. Buffalo, New York, our city. Thrillist named us the most underrated city to spend a weekend. The Washington Post had a great write-up. They have a recurring series called You're Going Where? And so the answer to that question in their December issue was Buffalo. But it's basically, we've been trying to identify recurring features and stories about, that can be written about second-tier, cities that maybe they're not New York or Chicago or Los Angeles, but they have great stories to tell too. So we're out pitching that kind of story, and we had, some of our greatest success yet in 2018. So this is a quote. I'll read it off in case you can't read it from back there. This just kind of speaks to this idea that Buffalo is coming into its own as a destination. This is from Thrillist writer Matt Meltzer, who we hosted on a press trip in 2017. In a time when every American city starts to seem the same, when Dallas looks like Tampa, looks like Charlotte, looks like Phoenix, Buffalo feels solidly like Buffalo, New York. The people are real, the food is great, and they've repurposed beautiful relics without a hint of pretension. You will party harder, eat better, and make more new friends in a weekend, all for less money than anywhere else in America. Wow. Yeah, that's Buffalo. And Thrillist is a very reputable digital travel site, reaches hundreds of thousands of readers on a monthly basis. It's, to have this kind of coverage, and what really struck me about this too, is that this is the heart of who we are as a city. It's not even about the new developments. It's not, all of that is great, and we're going to talk more about that later. But we're starting, I think, to really accept who we are as a city and what our strengths are, and just kind of be comfortable in our own skin as a city. We can be proud just to be Buffalo. We don't need to be a larger city. We don't need to be something that we're not. We're really coming into our own as a destination. I think that quote really speaks to that. So the question of really what makes a great story, that is at the heart of what I have to ask myself every day in my job at Visit Buffalo Niagara. It's not just enough to have new developments and talk about a revitalized waterfront or restored architecture. It really, every day I have to get to the heart of the Buffalo story, basically, and articulate that in pitches to travel writers all around the country. So a little bit about me. I mean, I've been telling stories for most of my life. On the left there, that's the family newspaper, the Hayden Herald, an early 1997 edition. In fact, two of my most prominent subscribers are in the back there, my mom and dad. Didn't have a wide circulation, although I was proud that, from my house in North Buffalo, it did get as far as West Seneca, where my Uncle Bob and Aunt Kate lived, too. So that was in the late 1990s when I was about 8, 9 years old. By 2003, I was writing for Next, which was the teen section of the Buffalo News. The very first story I ever wrote was an opinion piece trying to get teenagers to be more passionate about Buffalo, basically. The title at the time was For All Our Sakes, Buffalo Must Survive, which obviously speaks to the fact that in 2003, the city itself was in a much different place. That was article number 1. It was kind of a mission of mine over my 4 years at Next to write stories about Buffalo and tell the city's story. And on the right there is a full-page, two-page spread on different hidden gems in Buffalo. So I was always trying to get teenagers my age more interested in the city and exploring the city. Went to Syracuse for journalism, was a newspaper reporter for 2 years, and things have kind of come full circle now at 30 years old, promoting Buffalo's story for a living. So at the core of that question of what makes a great story, I really have to go back to who I was as a journalist, because in media relations, you basically have to think like a journalist in order to talk to these travel media and pitch them something that's going to resonate with them. So, I mean, is what I'm pitching, is it rare or unusual? Is there something quirky or extraordinary or something that no one else can, claim, basically? This is uniquely Buffalo. This is a story that only Buffalo can really say, this is ours. And that tends to really kind of cut through the clutter of journalists' inboxes. Is it timely? Is something new? Has something recently opened? Is there a new development? So, case in point, when the Martin House, Frank Lloyd Wright's Martin House, installs its landscape this June, that'll be the final piece of the 25-year restoration there. So that's another news peg to say that, after 25 years, as of this June, the Martin House will be restored. That's timeliness. And, is there a human interest angle too? And we'll get more into that later, but I think a key of what makes Buffalo so special these days are the stories of individuals in the city. This Renaissance isn't just happening unto itself. This transformation isn't, just some abject, some third-party object. It's driven by the people in this city who have worked for years and even decades to kind of rebuild Buffalo brick by brick, block by block, neighborhood by neighborhood. And so those human interest stories, they're everywhere in this city if we take the time to look for them. So kind of getting into identifying the right pitch, here's a few different examples. It's not enough for me to say that lots of cities have waterfront development, because Cleveland has waterfront development, and Pittsburgh has waterfront development, and even Rochester, Syracuse, they're redeveloping their waterfront to some extent. So what is it about Buffalo's waterfront that does stand apart? What's unique about Buffalo that we can really kind of say, yeah, this is ours? And it's this, I think, one of those things is that we have one of the world's largest collection of grain silos. They're from the time when we were a major transportation center, and all the grain from the Midwest would be offloaded in the Port of Buffalo, stored in our silos, and then railroaded east. And all of these silos are still there for years. I think that the grain silos of Buffalo, they embody the Buffalo story, and they embody the sea change in how the city perceives itself, and how different that is than even 10 years ago. Even show of hands, a decade ago, who wanted to tear down the grain silos on the waterfront? It's okay if you say, oh, so maybe okay, thank you. And now, it's amazing what's happening down there between, so this was a story that I pitched to the Associated Press that got picked up by dozens of different outlets. Buffalo's industrial cathedrals slowly finding new life. That's the San Diego Union Tribune. It even made it in outlets overseas too. When the AP picks something up, it really goes all over, which is awesome. But, what's happening down there, this idea that take, an old grain silo and now launch off a zip line from it. Or hear spoken word, the Just Buffalo Literary Center's Silo City reading series. Amazing things are happening down there, and a lot of it was just a sea change in how Buffalo thinks of itself, basically, how we perceive these structures that maybe at one time people considered to be a blight on the city. Lots of cities have new hotels, obviously. That's not something that's uncommon at all, but it's a little less common to stay in a hotel that is a former state asylum. So this was on lonelyplanet.com. Buffalo's new Hotel Henry opens an abandoned asylum. I will say by far and away in the last couple of years, anytime I'm talking to a writer who's done any research about Buffalo themselves, they'll say like, can I stay in that old mental hospital and I'll see what I can do, but it tends to be, that's a unique experience. That's something that is really extraordinary that's come online here just in the last couple of years. And it helps us cut through the clutter of other cities' pitches, and it's a real point of differentiation for us. And then, lots of cities have a boom in craft breweries. Craft beer is not an uncommon thing now across American cities. We have a city planner in Buffalo who coined the term beer-oriented development. His name is Chris Hawley. You might know Chris. The idea of transit-oriented development, you build a subway station and it turns around a neighborhood. Beer-oriented development is you take a brewery and it serves as a catalyst, basically, to bring a whole area of the city back because people are coming into an area and exploring it in ways that they weren't before the opening of the craft brewery. So we got the Chicago Tribune to write a story about that, centered around that theme. There's examples of that throughout Buffalo too, whether, over on Niagara Street here, what Resurgence Brewing Company did to activate that stretch of Niagara Street. Amazing, the Beltline Brewing now in Larkinville off of Swan Street, I think is another example of that. What Old First Ward Brewing did in the, with Gene McCarthy's and kind of bringing back that bringing people into that neighborhood. It's really remarkable, that beer can serve as a catalyst. So lots of cities have an evolving restaurant scene, but only Buffalo has one of the world's, greatest collection of regional foods. And that's where the advent of the Buffalo Wing Trail came last year too. At one point we thought, well, geez, that's the one thing people do know about us is that we have wings. But in doing more research about Buffalo, we picked a dozen different restaurants, and the number of stories basically at these restaurants, when we talk about storytelling, Barbell Tavern in East Aurora, they hand paint their sauce onto the wings. Elmo's in Amherst, they double dip their wings, which is they fry them, they sauce them, they grill them, and then they sauce them again. So wings actually aren't just wings in Buffalo, and these unique stories we kind of brought to the fore with the Wing Trail. So Bon Appetit covered the Wing Trail last year, Savour, Food and Wine, any number of outlets where, this was something different. This is uniquely Buffalo, and it was a way for us to kind of enter the national conversation. So we talked about, what makes a good pitch, some of the ways we've differentiated Buffalo in the last couple of years. From there, basically we have to do our best to shout the story from the rooftops. I attend a number of conferences in a given year from the Travel Media Association of Canada, Society of American Travel Writers, TBEX, which is the Travel Bloggers Exchange, and the International Media Marketplace at the Javits Center in New York City. It's a full day, 24 appointments in the course of one day in New York with travel writers from all over the country who come to New York at the end of January. We do have a PR firm on retainer in New York who sets up some desk side visits when I do go down there. So that's been a great way. One of the visits from last fall with someone from CNN looks like it's going to lead to a press visit this spring, which is very exciting. So we find that in-person interaction is really key. I mean, I do send out dozens, even hundreds of pitches, just even cold pitches in a given year via email. But just like we're here tonight, there's nothing that beats that sort of face-to-face interaction to convey the Buffalo story. So like I said, I mean, altogether, we're pitching hundreds of outlets. And that's the thing about media relations and telling the Buffalo story. It was great to kind of, share all of that success that we had in 2018. The truth is, so much of what we do, we just take a lot of things and sort of throw them against the wall and see what sticks, to be quite honest. And you have to do that when you're pitching so much. Only a fraction of what, we send out, what we pitch, is ever going to lead to some coverage. But every day is a new opportunity to find that next great story. So once we pitch someone and they're interested in coming to Buffalo, We have a budget in a given year to host travel writers. Basically, we bring them up here. In 2018, we hosted 50 travel media altogether in some capacity. So that might include, anywhere from like a 48-hour to a 72-hour trip in Buffalo. There's definitely some of, the greatest hits in there where we're making sure they get to the Martin House and to the Albright Knox and to Canal Side. Oftentimes, we're trying to arrange for them to stay somewhere like Hotel Henry or in Buffalo off Elmwood too is a great partner of ours. We will meet them for a meal. Sometimes I will remain their tour guide kind of throughout the duration of the stay, or I let them go on their own and explore Buffalo if that's what they prefer. So we, comp their stay, attraction passes, at least some meals. And the real key here, though, I think, and why these press trips are so successful, is the idea of connecting media who visit Buffalo with some of the most interesting people in the city who are driving that transformation. It's not enough to just be on a head-spinning whirlwind trip where you go to, 2 different art galleries and 3 different pieces of architecture. I mean, you'll see Buffalo, but I don't think you fully understand it until you meet some of the people that really make the city tick. So like I said, we try to introduce the media to Buffalonians who have amazing stories to tell. On the left there, that's George Scott. He's the president of the Colored Musicians Club of Buffalo. He can tell you stories about how Dizzy Gillespie and John Coltrane and Miles Davis used to jam in the second floor club there at that club at Michigan and Broadway. And he spearheaded an effort where, they did bake sales, they did whatever they could to keep that club open in the leaner days, and eventually that led to them opening a museum several years ago, and the club's doing better than ever before. Victor Gonzalez, 29, 30 years old, native of Acapulco, Mexico, and a twice nominated James Beard chef now too, just up the road here on Rhode Island Street at a restaurant called Las Puertas. When you go to Las Puertas, Victor is there to greet you, basically. And he, his story, we just had a press trip, scheduled, and I penciled in a meal at Las Puertas. But once the writer was there, his story so impressed the writer that the writer kind of scrapped what he was planning to do, started writing notes, and pitched Victor's story to the New York Times. So Victor's story was in the Bites section of the New York Times Sunday Travel. So it sort of speaks to, there are amazing stories in this city if we take the time to stop and listen and to understand. Nadine Youssef at the West Side Bazaar, she's one of the merchants there. The Bazaar, if you've never been there, I highly recommend you go. It's a not-for-profit incubator space that welcomes immigrants from around the world to operate a food stall or a clothing stall at a reduced rent. They talk about something that's unique, different. That there aren't many incubator spaces like that, and in the sort of political environment we're in right now, this idea of Buffalo being a welcoming city for immigrants is deeply resonating with a lot of national travel media, and that's actually where a lot of my pitches this year are kind of heading too, so there might be more on that. And then on the right there's one of my favorite people, Swanee Jim Watkins, who's the caretaker at Silo City on Buffalo's waterfront. Swanee had been, until recently, he had been, living at Silo City. Loves to, he'll welcome you there. He'll offer you a Budweiser and just take you around the property for a tour. The one writer we had was so enamored with Swanee that she ended up going back on her own like 3 other times over the course of the 72 hours to talk to him. And the closing line of her story, the Sunday Times of Travel piece, which we'll get to later, was Niagara Falls, ? Not when a barbecue at Swanee's is in the cards. So but it speaks to the fact, and I think this is what's happening with Buffalo and why Buffalo is, kind of gaining interest in the national media and among national travelers. These are experiences, you go to New York City now or Midtown Manhattan, there's a Dwayne Reed and a Starbucks on every corner now. So many of the larger cities where rents are increasing and, it's harder just to live without being in a very, kind of corporate environment. And Buffalo still has room for everybody. And these stories, journalists who meet some of the great people of Buffalo, are so impressed by them and the stories that they have to tell. So basically, if we really like, if a trip went well for a visiting travel writer, we'll even have them back. While the national media hits, they're the sexy hits of the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal. This is Lake Erie Lifestyle Magazine. It's the monthly magazine for the Erie Times News in Erie, PA. Steve and Marissa Urbanik are a husband and wife travel team who have become good friends of mine because we've hosted them on multiple occasions. They produce a story every time. And quite frankly, while we need the national stories to kind of move our city's cachet forward and change people's hearts and minds about Buffalo, these regional stories are hugely important in terms of actually moving the needle forward for our hotel industry and for our travel industry. Because someone reads this in Erie, Pennsylvania, and it's not hard for them by the end of the month to plan a 2-night stay here. So these are much more practical media hits, but they're a real component of our outreach and what we try to do, too. So I thought we'd run through just how did some of these big stories come to be. Julia Buckley at the Sunday Times of London, as early as 2015 is when I met her. She was here under I Love New York's auspices, writing a story for National Geographic Traveler, UK. She was here for just like an overnight, I think. I only met her, but I stayed in touch then. And the key to all of this is kind of building relationships with travel media. So that was 2015. In 2018, we actually pitched her on the Buffalo Wing Trail. I don't know if you guys remember last April, there was a late season ice storm that happened on a weekend last April. That's when our visitor from London was here. So she, just by luck, she had planned to take her own car around. I'm like, have you ever driven an ice before? And she said, no, so I was then with her kind of going to these different wing trail stops. But ultimately, right after that, she got a new job at the Sunday Times of London. She pitched a story about our waterfront. So even though she was here in April, she came back in June to see the city in the summer. And then by August, it led to this piece in the print edition called Queen of New York. And again, the digital edition, Buffalo, America's Coolest Summer City. Jennifer Fernandez from the Wall Street Journal. In early 2017, she was here for March Madness, actually. Her husband is a huge Villanova fan, but she is a hugely accomplished travel writer who reached out to me when she was in town. She had all of like 90 minutes, I think, in between basketball games. I picked her up at the arena and basically had to chart out like a whirlwind tour to try to impress upon her that this was a city that was worth covering. We stayed in touch from there. By spring of last year, she placed a story in the Wall Street Journal. She just came up for a day where we took her around. And then in August, this piece came out, Escape to Buffalo, A Skeptic's Guide to a Great Weekend Getaway. It has one of my favorite leads of any story. Only knuckleheads and the obstinately unenlightened write off Buffalo, New York is nothing more than a winter icebox and the birthplace of a certain sports bar delicacy, which I love that. I mean, we have to combat those knuckleheads, so it's nice when the Wall Street Journal does that for us. And then Trisha Ping of Lonely Planet, this was someone we pitched via email. So there is some email pitching that works too, but basically the point of showing you these, there's not any one way that all these stories kind of come together too. There's a whole variety of ways, and we just sort of, as they come, we try to do as much proactively as we can, as this one worked out in Lonely Planet, hike, paddle, pedal, and zip for outdoor adventures in Buffalo. But any number of sort of origin stories accompany these national media hits, and it's been such a privilege to be involved in them. So, over the last 5 years, there's been nearly 750 stories about Buffalo that we've played some role in that have spread throughout the world. So that's anything from, hosting media visits. We're closing in on about 200 visits over the last 5 years of visiting travel media. Photo requests, just answering questions, follow-up questions journalists have. That's where that 750 number comes from. Like I mentioned, those 200 press visits. And then ad equivalency, this idea of what would it have cost, this free publicity that comes with a media hit, what would that have cost if we took it out in advertising? And we compute that to be more than $21 million over the last 5 years. In comparison, Visit Buffalo Niagara's entire operating budget, including there's a whole sales side that works on bringing conventions here to town. There's a sports commission that works on getting amateur athletic events here. So there's 25 people who work at VBN. Our whole budget is like $3.5 million. So the fact that media relations alone is, produced something that's equivalent to $21 million really speaks to that kind of return on investment too. But it's funny, right as Buffalo's coming into its own, right as, we're reaching this moment where we're being covered finally. We're not just the best kept secret anymore. We're not, we're actually becoming a known entity, is at the very same moment that the media landscape itself is changing dramatically. So traditional media opportunities, the size of a travel section in a print newspaper, paid travel writers on staff at a paper. These are things that are becoming increasingly rare, and it's harder to just, pitch the travel editor of a paper because there hardly are that many travel editors at newspapers anymore. And case in point, one of the big setbacks kind of was when one of our greatest ambassadors was Jennifer Bain. She was the food editor at the Toronto Star and then became the travel editor in 2016. Each year, 15, 16, 17, we had a cover story on like a section head of the Toronto Star, one of Canada's largest newspapers, because of that connection. At the end of 17, the Star basically eliminated her budget and she decided to leave, and then they run all wire copy now. So there are no stories, travel stories, being assigned out of Toronto anymore. And that really changes our ability to get in like the travel pages of the Star, and we lost that connection there. So it kind of begs the question, like, what do we do as this landscape changes? And so we're making more inroads in sort of the new media realm too. There's a host of travel bloggers out there. There's social influencers, this idea that someone even has like an Instagram page with a lot of followers in a concentrated area, and they're covering a certain city or something like that. If they're open to traveling, we might be able to reach an audience on somebody's phone now that we wouldn't have even conceived of a decade ago. So it's sort of, we've had to keep an open mind and evaluate where new opportunities might be. So this idea of working with an Instagram, I know it's a little hard to see up there, but that's called TO's Finest. And Instagram, a photo-driven social media application. It has well over 100,000 followers, and they're all concentrated in Toronto, and they specialize in food. So we hosted TO's Finest last summer, and he took a number of photos of food around Buffalo, everything from Ted's Hot Dogs to Lloyd Taco Factory, and got a ton of engagement. And all of his followers are in Toronto, a key market that we want to be in. So while we can't necessarily get on the page of the Toronto Star anymore, a lot of our audience are spending more time on their phones anyways these days. And so it's basically on us to figure out, okay, in the light of what's changing and what's evolving, how do we reach people who want to come to Buffalo? And this is one way. So as I mentioned, they have a lot of millennials following TO's Finest. They had a huge following, so it made a lot of sense for us. One Modern Couple was a blog that I met at a conference, sort of like some of the examples I was sharing earlier. They created a guide to Buffalo, a city you'll fall in love with. And that blog, while they don't have a newspaper circulation, they did produce a YouTube video that got 44,000 views. and published a blog article. They shared content with their social media followers, and they have more than 140,000 followers altogether. So it all depends how you kind of look at it these days in destination marketing. It's a real shame, I am a newspaper journalist at heart too, and it pains me to see newspapers struggling right now. But in terms of destination marketing and storytelling, there are still ample opportunities out there to pitch the Buffalo story, to get Buffalo's story to audiences we wouldn't have conceived of even a few short years ago. But it's not just limited now to pitching, although something that's changing in our office and in what we do is telling our own story now more too. So we have a blog on our website. In 2018, we wrote more than 200 articles that were published on Visit Buffalo Niagara's blog. This is one that just came up, just published yesterday. Has anyone been to Pastry by Camille on Hurdle? Yeah. So I got a chance to talk to him last Friday. The owner, Camille Lecaire, he is 25 years old and grew up in Brittany, France. And at 17, he left his family and basically knocked on the door of France's oldest bakery at 5 a.m. one morning and demanded a job and wouldn't leave until they gave him a job. Spent several years then kind of immersion by fire in France, went to New York, trained there, and then he met his wife in their apartment building in Brooklyn, and she's from Lockport. So when they were expecting their first kid, they ended up moving up here. He had to start all over again. But in the process, Buffalo gets blessed with this authentic French bakery at the corner of Hurdle and North Park. So I'm able to use my kind of former journalistic skills as a journalist to tell his story and try to capture what that's like at Pastry by Camille. So might I pitch this at some point? Possibly. I think Camille's story is fascinating, and it could resonate with the right travel writer. But it's a story for our website too. We are now content producers as well. So, those stories then, they're shared, to our Facebook audience. We have more than 92,000 followers ourselves on Facebook. A lot of the people who follow us on Facebook, Visit Buffalo Niagara's Facebook, have some connection to Buffalo. But as far as we're concerned, that's okay, because the expats who follow our page, who maybe they grew up here, but then they live in North Carolina now, or they're, out west or something like that. If they follow our page and they share a piece of content we put on Visit Buffalo Niagara's social media page, suddenly someone in Raleigh, North Carolina is reading something about Buffalo in their Facebook newsfeed. So we have definitely a lot of expats kind of following the Visit Buffalo Niagara page and on Twitter too, but they end up kind of becoming ambassadors for us. So you can see actually the Pastry by Camille blog, when we posted that, 1,200 people liked it, more than 400 people shared it, and it's already reached, I believe that's 57,000 people, just on our own channels too. So it's sometimes getting more difficult to land Buffalo stories on third-party channels or in a traditional media outlet. But here we have these great opportunities to tell our own story too. Another piece of that is our Buffalo Live series. So I'm the host of a monthly Facebook Live video on Visit Buffalo Niagara's Facebook page. And I try to cover a unique or quirky aspect of Buffalo every month. So I thought, and just in the last 3 years, those videos have garnered more than 650,000 views. I thought I'd dig into the vault and because of the time of year we're in, and share this one that was our most popular one. I think it got close to 200,000 views that we posted 2 years ago from the Broadway Market.
Good morning, Buffalo. Brian Hayden here at Visit Buffalo Niagara, another episode of Buffalo Live. Well, it's Easter time in Buffalo.
That can mean only one thing: stop at the city's iconic Broadway Market. Traces its roots back in the city's Broadway Fillmore neighborhood all the way back to 1888. And we think about some of the iconic foods at the Broadway Market. There's collectively centuries worth of food history and food traditions here. So we thought we'd quickly run through some of these iconic foods I'm here with Adam with Melchesky's Butterlands. Adam, tell us a little bit more. This is a huge Butterland you've come to show us. How many of these do you go through a year, and what's the significance of these Butterlands?
This is actually our largest Butterland that we make, that I brought with me here today. We make 6 sizes altogether. They're in all sorts of grocery stores all throughout the state of New York, down to Pennsylvania, Ohio, the East Coast, and Massachusetts. So we sell a lot of these lambs, about 80,000 worth over the Easter season. So yeah, so we were busy making these for a long time, and we're excited to finally be getting close to Easter, where we'll be able to sell a lot of these. They have a huge meaning behind them. It's a religious symbol. The Lamb of God in the Eucharist. The red ribbon is represents the blood of Christ. The eyes, peppercorn eyes, represent the lighting of the world. And the red flag represents Alleluia, peace on earth.
Why do you think these butter lambs are so popular during the Easter season? I mean, what kind of traditions does this hold for people?
I mean, it's just a tradition. You have it at your Easter table, brunch, dinner, breakfast. On Easter Sunday, the meaning is there, the religious symbol. Easter is a very holy day. So, I mean, people that started this tradition, decades ago in Buffalo, but this goes all the way back to Poland. So, it's just a tradition for a lot of families to have, and it wouldn't be Easter without a butter lamb on the table.
Very good, very good. All right, Adam, thank you. I'm going to continue my tour of the Broadway Market now. If you take a look over here, you can see there's sponge candy bars. There's all sorts of delicious, sweet confectionery treats in Buffalo, and basically, you can't get enough of chocolate at Easter time. So lots of delicious stuff here. And now you see Krishiki Bakery traces its roots back 30 years at the Broadway Market. Austin over here. Austin, how are you? Good, good. Tell us a little bit more about your bakery, your family's bakery, why you continue to be at the Broadway Market after all these years.
Definitely. So we've been at the bakery, like you said, for 30 years now. We're actually celebrating. My grandparents came here in '87, right from Poland, $100 in their suitcases, and they were just determined to make, the American dream for themselves. And they took over this bakery here at the Broadway Market. And ever since we've been here, we're huge supporters of the market. It's done so much for my family and the whole community. And it really just continues to keep this area of Buffalo alive. And it's great for the Easter season. We have all the traditional things, the butter lambs, the Polish sausage, the horseradish. We have the platzik, krishiki, makowiak, rye bread, you name it. So it's really all about just keeping the tradition alive and, bringing something to the Buffalo community.
Absolutely. Austin, thank you for sharing some of your family's story. And we're going to get just some close-ups of all these delicious treats here. You look at these wonderful pastries and get a close-up of that platzik there. Really top-notch stuff. Perfect for the Easter season. And our final stop over here is going to be the Broadway Market horseradish stand. Wanda, good morning. How are you? It's good to see you. So this Wanda and Zen have been bottling horseradish here for 30 years, and they took over from a company that was making it for 30 years before that too. And when you take a look at the ingredients on the Broadway Market horseradish, there it is, horseradish root and vinegar. It doesn't get much more authentic than that, Buffalo. Wanda, could you give me a sample of that delicious horseradish? Thank you. All right. I'm going to finish up here with just a little dollop of horseradish on this cracker and toasting out to the Easter season in Buffalo, New York at the Broadway Market. So for Visit Buffalo Niagara and Buffalo Live, I'm Brian Hayden. We'll see you next time.
Thank you. The funny thing is that in the prep for that, I tried one before we went on camera, and I think I blew out my sinuses at that point. So I felt practically nothing by the time it was time to film. And actually, my coworker who was filming said, do something, to react, because I felt I was numb at that point from horseradish. But case in point. So that the microphone there cost maybe $200 altogether. The camera is my coworker's iPhone. that, he's able to record on. We do live streaming videos when we can, where we record live. We find that Facebook kind of favors those in terms of the number of views that they get. But for a very minimal investment, we're producing these sort of single-shot videos that feature buffalo and do very well. And it's been a terrific return on investment for us. So another example, we do work too with the wonderful Paget Films, who created a new Buffalo 101 series of videos. We just had National Cereal Day in Buffalo. So this is an homage to Buffalo's cereal.
Hallmarks of visiting Buffalo that visitors often notice immediately is the smell of Cheerios in the air. Because Buffalo is still one of the great milling capitals of North America. Cheerios are still made here in this city. And I always like to say that the smell of Cheerios is like the industrial mark of our city's greatness. And in some ways actually is like the national smell of the Republic of Buffalo, if there is such a thing.
So that was a video that Paget Films produced in conjunction with Visit Buffalo Niagara. Really great production quality there, but again, we're kind of producing our own content. Part of that too is asking our followers, who are basically huge fans of Buffalo, to submit photos of Buffalo too. So we launched the hashtag #TravelBuff in 2016, which every time someone's around the city, we encourage them to take their phone, snap a photo of Buffalo. Maybe it's of our architecture or our waterfront or our food, and submit it to TravelBuff. And then by extension, we then repurpose those photos onto our social media channels. But the photos themselves, are initially posted, and all of these people have an audience as well. So there's a great magnifying effect, kind of mobilizing the Buffalo Nation to take great photos of Buffalo. And then another example, that's travel and leisure. In 2016, we basically did all we could to summon our fans and followers to vote for Buffalo as America's favorite city. And then we were, the Buffalo Nation rallied and followed through. So in that year, Buffalo was named Travel and Leisure's America's favorite city, basically. And we've had some other success since then in being named, one of the top cities for pizza and for architecture, and I think for parks and gardens too. So we can enter into the national conversation just by summoning that sort of collective enthusiasm that exists right now in Buffalo as well. So what are some of these takeaways? I mean, there's never been a better time in Buffalo in terms of storytelling, I think. I mean, sure, the city had its rise, it had its heyday, it then had its fall, but this idea of the rise, the fall, and then the rebirth, the transformation, reimagination of Buffalo. I don't think there's a more exciting time in terms of the stories to tell than right now in 2019 in Buffalo, in our city. In addition to that, I mean, as long as we focus on what makes our story great, if we focus on the nature of the story, we'll remain in that national and international conversation. The medium might change. I had an old college journalism professor who was a former newspaper journalist who, even 10 years ago, the landscape was changing, and she said, if I have to tweet the story, fine. If I have to get on a plane and, have one of those banners behind the plane, that works too. But if you have a good story, it doesn't really matter what the medium is, and we'll find the medium, but the key is finding the great story. And I think, for all of us kind of walking out of here tonight, take a look around, strike up a conversation with someone at your neighborhood bakery or brewery or restaurant. Find out, what's been going on in that project in your neck of the woods, and you might find a really great story too. I think what I've learned in this job in the last 5 years is that great stories are everywhere in Buffalo. If we take the time to have an open mind and to stop and observe and listen. And that's about it. So. So, thank you.
I know that Brian is open to taking questions or comments on what you've seen and heard tonight. Anything for Brian? Please.
There's a buzz that's being noticed more from around the country and the world about Buffalo that isn't being noticed much in Buffalo. That's the fact that we're going to be a climate refuge city, and people are going to be moving here because of that. Just this last week, the New York Times called me, NBC News called me. There's a lot of notice because of the Guardian article, the Buffalo News article. And it's yet to be picked up here, that we got to, prepare for that. But you mentioned something to the effect, and we have room for them regarding immigrants or people moving here. That's so true. I mean, along with Detroit, we're the least overdeveloped city in the country, so we've got room. So the people that will be coming here are not necessarily, there will be people coming here not just as tourists, but they'll be visitors to look over Buffalo and the region because they're going to be moving businesses or moving families here. Is there a way that you can interface with those visitors who aren't just tourists?
That's a good question. I know that basically there are a few different tiers to promoting Buffalo too. And our role traditionally has been being on the front lines of just inspiring or enticing the visit. That the visit is kind of the first necessary step. And then, there's an organization like Invest Buffalo Niagara that's working on actually like luring companies here, getting, folks to relocate here, to live here, to play up Buffalo's livability. But without enticing them to visit, I don't think none of those further steps are even possible. I've always considered the work we do to be that first step to even get someone to move here. So it's, it's definitely what you're saying. We should factor that into our long-term planning too of where the city might be after 30 more years of climate change. But it's certainly something for us to keep in mind.
Visit Buffalo Niagara, you're doing a wonderful job. I guess you had mentioned in the beginning that everybody loves what's happening to Buffalo. We're having this renaissance. And I would reckon to say, certainly a lot of people have enjoyed what's happened to Buffalo, but not everyone. The development hasn't benefited everyone equally. And, of course, we look around the medical corridor, and certainly the work of like Push Buffalo and Open Buffalo have been doing a lot of great work generating dialogue about issues of gentrification, et cetera. And I wonder, how you think about some of the not so positive aspects of our economic development. And as you mentioned, you go to other cities and things are unaffordable with Starbucks in every corner. At another point, how do we think about sustainability in a broader sense of cultural sustainability of keeping our communities here, appreciating this economic development, but also balancing that? How do you kind of like reconcile all that within your job of promoting and boosting the place that we care about so much?
Oh, for sure. That's a very good question. We've talked about this in our office before, and without a doubt, Buffalo remains a very challenged city too, and there are problems so deep-seated that they go back 50 years or more. Entrenched poverty, issues that just are not going to kind of go away anytime soon, and that are going to take, if they took generations to get here, they're going to take generations to solve as well. Our particular role, we've always really felt, is to accentuate the positive, like that, to find the very best in this city and share it with, a wider audience, basically. So I think I take great pride in sort of connecting people to the individuals in the city, like at the West Side Bazaar, or small business owners, finding out their stories and trying to support them. That we're not just highlighting the major multi-million-dollar developments in the city. I mean, kind of as I spoke to in the presentation, I think the key of why the national media have an interest in Buffalo is that, someone who's not a multi-million-dollar developer can make a great impact on the city at this time still too. As we have greater success as a city, will more of these kind of conversations be taking place of how to balance these kind of different forces that might be at work? Absolutely, and I think it's something that will continue to kind of evolve in the years to come, that conversation about what's happening to our city. Is it all good? How do we look out for everybody? In my role, sort of, I just find I want to do the best I can to try and lift everyone up, to tell as many stories as I can of the people who might not have a vessel kind of to get their story to a broader audience otherwise. So that's a real mission that I take very seriously.
Hi, this was a great presentation tonight. It's great to see that Buffalo's social media presence is growing, and seems like you're doing a lot with that with a small team, so it's incredibly impressive. I've been an Airbnb host off and on in Buffalo since Airbnb started, and I've been amazed at the explosion of Airbnb in some of the more desirable areas to visit Buffalo. And I was wondering what your thought was on how Airbnb hosts or sharing economy participants here in Buffalo can act as sort of ambassadors on a very small level, and whether they're to new visitors to Buffalo, and whether or not there are any opportunities to partner with hosts and Visit Buffalo Niagara to create some sort of more organized opportunities, whether it be tours, unique visits, unique opportunities, because as people book on Airbnb, they're also looking at the experiences. And we need more of those. We're a little bit behind other cities as far as what's being offered. So I'm curious about your thought on the sharing economy and people who might not be staying at hotels, but are sort of either staying in someone's extra bedroom or renting a home in the Elmwood Village or Allentown. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
No, I think it's another great question here. So many great questions this evening. The Airbnb trend is something that no destination marketing organization should ignore. I mean, it's happening, and we talk about, in the same way we're talking about, how people are spending more time on Instagram versus a traditional media outlet, they're choosing to stay in an Airbnb rather than book a hotel. I've done it myself when I've traveled too. So it is something certainly for us to keep in mind. I'll say that this very topic is the kind of thing that's discussed at national travel and tourism conferences now, where destination marketing organizations all around the country get together. Because traditionally, the destination marketing organization has been funded by the county's hotel bed tax. And so there are sort of dynamics at work where, historically the promotion is to get to boost occupancy at hotels, and that's one of the measurements that we've had. But Airbnb historically has only, really taken off in the last several years. So I don't have an answer tonight of where, what can be done. But without a question, it's something that destination marketing organizations are very aware of, and I think you'll see greater partnership. You'll see more of a relationship built between a DMO like Visit Buffalo Niagara and Airbnb owners in the years to come, in the 2020s. I mean, we talk about extraordinary experiences. The idea that someone can now stay, say, on, Lancaster Avenue in the city's Elmwood Village, charming tree-lined street, just a stone's throw, from cafes, patios. But they're staying in someone's private home. But it can be a tremendous, uniquely Buffalo experience. And the city's built environment, its architecture, really lends itself to the Airbnb environment too. So, there should be more of a partnership in the years to come. Those conversations are happening, and we'll see where it goes. Yeah.
One of the key products that you're selling is Buffalo's architecture, and I had someone ask to meet with me this month who is working on a book about Buffalo architecture, and they had a pretty good handle on the historic architecture in the city, but what they wanted to pick my brain on, so to speak, was, what do we have that's good architecture from recent years, from, like say the year 2000 on, and, we spent a lot of time sort of with puzzled looks on our faces, trying to come up with examples that would be worthy of highlighting or writing about, or that anybody would be interested in from out of town or even local. And honestly, there wasn't much. And, surely one of the reasons for that is that we went through a time when there wasn't lots of new stuff being built. But another reason is that we're just not doing good architecture. One of the reasons for that is that, the city of Buffalo doesn't have design review, doesn't have architectural review, like many other cities have a design review board or an architectural review board that actually work with developers to, make sure they're building something that has, good quality architecture. And I guess I'm wondering, given that our architecture is a product that you folks are selling, is there a role for Visit Buffalo Niagara in addition to just folks who are sort of like architecture enthusiasts or armchair architects or people who like to grouse about the architecture in the Buffalo Rising comment section? Is there a specific role for Visit Buffalo Niagara in saying we need to up our game, and a way we could do that is to do design review and architectural review, and let's see if we can make that happen?
Well, I'll say that, traditionally our role has been one of sort of promotion rather than of criticism or of advocacy, kind of taking a certain stand. We kind of just, we're not the ones like behind the projects, but we promote what's here. That being said, a portion of the media that we host in any given year, we've had I've pitched a number of architecture critics in recent years to come to Buffalo. So like Oliver Wainwright of The Guardian visited here in 2015, wrote a story about Frank Lloyd Wright and the zombie building boom, which is this idea of, everyone loves the Martin House in Graycliff, but it was kind of posing the question, when we take a design of his that's from after Wright died and built it, is that the right thing to do? Is that what Wright would have wanted? And so, architecture critics have audiences of their own, audiences that love architecture. And so sometimes they, by extension, can maybe inform the conversation here too. I know, I was with, I think it was Ollie Wainwright, and he was singing the praises of One M&T Plaza downtown. And I had never thought twice about that building before. But now I look at it and it's like, no, it's sort of sleek, it's of its time. It's actually a very interesting building. And so it is a mission of ours, to bring people in here from all sorts of perspectives, and maybe by extension, they inform our community's conversation in a way we hadn't thought about before. That's one of the sort of byproducts of hosting a visitor who's been all over the world, basically. So while I don't really foresee us, taking some kind of review or criticism role, even in the media we host, their observations, when we repost their stories and what they have to say, Buffalo Rising has done stories on Curb.com's architecture critic and their visit here and what they had to say. And so when we get there, we can connect their thoughts to the local population. I think it can, in its own way, hopefully inform, the community conversation here.
We'll take one more question if there's anyone who has one. Oh.
Liz can be to the front, please.
Oh, Liz. Okay. Okay. Are there any more questions? Yes? Liz, can...
It seems to me that we have so much going for us right now. The problem is getting people to Buffalo. There's no way to get directly to Buffalo, and once you're here, unless you're able to use Uber and Lyft, you can't get around Buffalo unless you have a car. And there's got to be some way that we can promote a greater sense of community and transportation so that people can get around to all the places that are so wonderful in this town.
Yeah, I mean, so you had mentioned sort of in spite of ride sharing, like in addition to that, beyond that, you're sort of saying?
Well, we have a town that goes nowhere. We have a terrible NFTA bus system. You can't get to Buffalo anywhere on a direct flight, except maybe New York City. So getting here is a huge issue, and then once you're here, getting around is an even greater issue.
I mean, I would say that our experience, is comparable to a number of other mid-sized cities. It's not, so once someone's here, they know that Buffalo is not, it's not New York where everything is immediately reachable by subway. I mean, the ride sharing here has made a huge difference because in truth, a lot of what visitors do is in a several mile square footprint between, say, the waterfront through downtown up to like the Martin House, maybe up, the Hurdle Avenue is like the northern outlier. And then you have Delaware Park and you have the Elmwood Village in Allentown. And so much of it. Now, there are plenty of outliers and points of interest to see beyond that footprint. But these are also incredibly walkable neighborhoods too. You've had hotels like Hotel Henry open in our neighborhoods now. You have a growing Airbnb trend as well. And then with something like Uber and Lyft, I mean, we don't, while our public transportation might not be that of larger cities, I think it's never been easier actually to kind of get around Buffalo with some of these advancements of the last few years.
But if there was something like the duck classes in Boston or a tourist thing beyond the Explore Buffalo, which does a superb job of pinpointing specific itineraries, but if there were a way for you to better promote Western New York with tourism, this is how you get around, and this is where everything is, because everything is 20 minutes.
Yeah, no, I mean, that would be great. I would love kind of even better connectivity up to the falls from Buffalo, too. There's certainly a lot that can be done. And in our role as the promoters, we'll be the first ones to shout that story once it happens. But it's going to take some other entity kind of to make that happen, though. But certainly a good idea for sure.
Can I invite everyone once again to show our appreciation for Brian Hayden's a wonderful presentation. You
so
really made Buffalo come alive, and it's obvious you're doing that. You're an evangelist for Buffalo. It's a great thing.
Thank you so much.
Right. We're going to move quickly now to the door prize drawing, so get your tickets out.
Does everyone have a ticket? I think so.
I'd like to remind you that there's a bunch of literature about the church on this table at the corner of the chapel and out in the narthex. Brian mentioned earlier that he's always striving to point to something that's unique. Well, for a lot of the places that you work or where you go to school, I want to point out one unique thing about First Church Buffalo. We're open every Sunday of the year. So don't be a stranger. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Ken. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Christina Banis, the business manager here at church, and with Liz Kampke, one of the co-coordinators of tonight's event. We have some wonderful door prizes. Everyone is eligible, and the way that it works, we're going to call the last 3 numbers of the red tickets. It's first come, first serve, so the first person called gets to pick from these prizes. A framed poster of the church tower, valued at $150. We have 2 individual overnight stays at Inn Buffalo off Elmwood. It's a luxury boutique hotel. Those are each valued at $250. We have a $100 gift certificate to Mother's Restaurant here in Allentown. A 1-year family membership to the Albright Knox Art Gallery, valued at $75. An Explore Buffalo Family Explorer Pass, also valued at $75. A $25 gift certificate to the Serendipity Thrift Store, which is housed in this church. I should also add that Explore Buffalo is one of our tenants as well. We have a copy of the book 12 Towers of Buffalo, written by Bill Fott, who lives in this neighborhood and serves on the board of One Symphony Circle, a sister organization of ours. And Pierce Kampke has donated some historic stereo views of Buffalo and Niagara Falls. So, Brian, would you, sorry, I lost you. We did a good shake, and I'll have Brian announce the last 3 numbers of each ticket. Okay.
What's this one for?
Oh, it's for to come and pick.
Oh, so you pick. Okay, I missed that part. Okay, so you pick. The first ticket is 456.
So then you can hand it to Liz, and so Liz, you'll handle that. Yay! Okay, so
It's a good bingo.
Second ticket is 445. Third is 427. 427.
more.
427. It's a good bingo. This is the Buffalo.
421.
Okay, 421.
455. 441. How many are left?
I lost count.
431. Hey, that's my dad. I swear this wasn't rigged.
Let's take, I think we only have 1 left. Let's make sure.
Okay, so we've got the poster, Serendipity Chef, and
So there are 3 up here. So there's 1 more to pick.
So there are 2 more? 2 more?
so we have 2 left.
Actually, that one's mine there, the 447.
Did you just win?
No,
Which one's yours?
447.
Okay.
468. 468. Going once. Going twice.
Chuck, are you 468? 468. Okay.
It is him?
No one's 468. Last call for 468. Okay.
426.
Oh, that's me. Yay.
Liz Kamke.
That crib is yours.
I'll take the gift shop to Serendipity.
Is that?
Okay, we've got one more.
We have the 12 Towers of Buffalo book is the remaining prize.
459.
There you go, Alan.
Thank you, everyone.
This book comes with a remote.